Welcome back, guys. So this is a session we're calling Flash Talks. And the reason we're doing that is there are going to be a bunch of short presentations that are going to be like conversation starters on things that have come up recently and to discuss issues that are prominent right now to our community. The speakers will go into greater depth in the breakout sessions. And each speaker is going to speak for 8 minutes or 10 minutes, and then we're going to have 2 minutes of Q&A. You got 10 minutes, 2 minutes of Q&A. All right, so first, I'd like to introduce Dante Allen. Dante is the executive director of CalABLE, and I was going to say he came from Sacramento, but he came from Fairfield, which is close enough to Sacramento. So without further ado, Dante.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm super happy to be here. Got a little alarmed when she said 8 minutes because I was like, oh, that's taking 2 minutes away from me. But I have a plan in these 10 minutes that I'm going to talk to you. Hopefully most of you are familiar with CalABLE. Can I get just a quick show of hands of folks who, good. This a sprinkling, not everybody, but good. But I want to tell you, they alluded to it in the first session this morning, but I want to tell you how you can, if you or your child is receiving SSI, how you can get another $277 a month just using your ABLE account. So in those 10 minutes, that's what I'll talk about. I have more time this afternoon, so if you want to come around and get the full talk on ABLE, I will. But just to sort of set the stage a little bit, there is a harsh financial reality for people with disabilities. People with disabilities, and that goes across the spectrum, whether it's developmental disabilities or physical disabilities. People with disabilities work less. When they work, they earn less. They are more likely to be unbanked and financially insecure, and are more likely to even forego treatments and medication because of financial concerns. And what we recognize within CalABLE is that this is not necessarily by accident. And one of the major reasons why is our disability services, the programs that were developed to benefit people with disabilities, have put limits upon us, right? They put the limits on how much money you can earn, how much money you can save, etc. And those things have unintended consequences. And that's why when we talk about the Federal ABLE Act, I refer to it as the most significant law for people with disabilities since the Americans with Disabilities Act. It added a new section to the IRS tax code. And yes, most of the time when we talk about laws for people with disabilities, they're usually in the Health and Human Services realm. This is actually in the IRS tax code. And what it does is it lets people with disabilities save money and invest, and if you put your money in your ABLE account, it doesn't affect your ability to continue to receive benefits. You can withdraw the money at any time that you need it, and that's penalty and tax-free as long as they're for disability-related expenses. CalABLE is California's program. There are 42 other states that have ABLE programs, and many of them are national programs, meaning that you don't have to live in that state in order to participate in that program. California is one of those national programs where you do not have to live here to participate. But there may be some benefits that are available to you based on state laws that we have passed that are only available to Californians who open a California or CalABLE account. Before the ABLE Act, any person receiving SSI had a limit of what kind of assets they could have. And it was a concrete limit on savings. You can have about $2,000 in the bank. Once you go above that $2,000, you'll get a letter from SSI that says you need to do a spin down. And if you don't do that spin down fast enough, we're going to help you out by discontinuing your cash benefit until you actually do that spin down. But now with an ABLE account, you can save up to $15,000 a year and $100,000 in total And SSI will disregard anything that you have in that ABLE account until you get above that. And the other good news is that CalABLE will reject if you try to put in more than $15,000 a year and you're not one of the few people that can. We'll let you know this is an excess contribution and you don't have to worry about it. The same thing when you get close to that $100,000, we'll let you know as well. You may have heard that in order to be eligible for an ABLE account, you have to have a disability, and it goes the wide spectrum of disabilities. If it's listed in the Social Security Administration Blue Book, it's a covered condition that makes you eligible for ABLE. You have to be, the onset of the disability had to occur before age 26. Now, there are bills in Congress right now that are looking to raise that age to 46 that will qualify more people. But the thing to know is that with developmental disabilities by default, you are born with them, you are eligible to open an ABLE account. If you are not receiving benefits, and it's not a requirement in order to have an ABLE account, you don't have to receive benefits. You can do a self-certification which says that you attest under penalty of perjury that the individual is disabled and that onset of that disability occurred before age 26. Just a few things to know. You're only allowed one ABLE account per disabled individual. You can move the account from state to state, but you have to close one to open the other. The beneficiary is always the owner. The fees to open an ABLE account or to have an ABLE account are very low. The example I give is if you had $3,000 in assets, it's going to cost you around $50 a year to maintain that account. They're less expensive and require less than special needs trusts, and withdrawals are tax exempt as long as they're spent on qualified disability expenses. Qualified disability expense is any expense that helps to enhance or improve an individual's health, independence, or quality of life. That's the important thing to know. Health, independence, quality of life, just about everything I can imagine would fit in one of those three categories. So is an ABLE account worth it? Could you use an additional $3,300 a year?
Duh.
I think just about everybody can. And so here's the very simple way to have an ABLE account. Just from the fact of having an ABLE account, you can get an increase of about $3,300 a year. So if you're helping an individual that is receiving SSI in any way with housing or food, SSI does a cut off the top, and it's about $277 a month. So whether you're doing that, it's called in-kind support, family support. And so whether you're paying rent directly to a landlord, or you're doing less than market rate rent for your own residence, that $277 is being chopped off. But here's the great news. If you're contributing as a third-party contributor, meaning if anyone other than the beneficiary themselves, if you're contributing to that ABLE account, that money is no longer considered income for that individual. So instead of doing that in-kind support and paying that landlord, what you do is you put that money into the person's ABLE account, and you're no longer giving in-kind support. So they'll get that boost of $277 a month. So I don't have a timer here, but I think I'm close to my time at the very least. But the reality is there are many other things that you can do with your ABLE account. It is an investment account, so you have the ability to start early and compound interest, and it is available that you can be an authorized legal representative if the beneficiary themselves doesn't have the capacity or the desire to manage their own funds. If they do, it's a great thing and they can, but those are the options that are available. Another question that I get very often is what happens to an ABLE account when the beneficiary passes away? And there's a very simple answer to that. The funds in the ABLE account go into the individual's estate. California passed a law that's only available to Californians with a CalABLE account. And if you've are familiar, Medicaid has the ability to recover from an ABLE account. Well, California passed a law, Medi-Cal will not seek to recover if you're a Californian with a CalABLE account. So if that was the thing that you were standing on the fence and waiting to open your ABLE account, get off the fence and come and join us. And so I'll take any questions that you have.
So, do we have any questions from the audience? And if so, can you please stand up to the mic? And if you could just state your name and where you're from, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Anita.
My turn. All right.
It's okay, just say it and I'll repeat the question.
I'm Anita from Alameda. So I'm a parent and I rent my room to my son. Would that be in-kind support? If we open up an ABLE account, I deposit the money into the ABLE account. He pays me rent from that ABLE account. Is that considered legit?
It is considered legit. I've heard it described, and don't say that I'm a state employee, but so I can't say this, but I've heard it described as the legal way to launder money. You can put your own money into the ABLE account and pay yourself.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm Trudy from Parents Helping Parents, and I've had families call and ask if they get a lump sum payout, can they deposit that money into the ABLE account without it hurting them?
It depends. And so I told you one of the key limits to an ABLE account is that you're limited to depositing just $15,000 a year. Yeah. And so if that lump sum is greater than that $15,000 a year, you're going to have to get a little creative. And when I say creative, you're going to have to play with the dates. So we're at the end of the year now. If you open an account today, you can put $15,000 in anywhere from November 16th to December 31st. And then on January 31st, you could put in another $15,000. There are very small limits of folks who can contribute more than that $15,000, but it is if the beneficiary themselves is working and they're not participating in a retirement plan, a employer-based retirement plan, they can contribute more of their own earnings into the account. But the lump sum is something that that we're still working on. The other creative idea is if you have a special needs trust, you can use your special needs trust to fund your ABLE account and then have all the flexibility that ABLE accounts are for.
Thank you so much, Dante,
Thank you.
for your creative suggestions.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So next, we're going to invite Myra back to the podium, and she's going to talk about conservatorship and why it's something that parents might want to consider.
Basically, I'm going to be a storyteller for a couple of minutes here. First, I want to tell you the story about my daughter, Molly. So, Molly is my now 26-year-old with Down syndrome and epilepsy. And I'm going to tell you my story because in my stories that I'm going to tell you as an advocate and as a parent, you're going to hopefully see why conservatorship has real value. So my daughter Molly had a blood clot in her lungs when she was 19. When she was 20, she had pain in her chest. So I hurried to Kaiser's emergency room and was concerned that was the problem. Well, they found nothing. They thought maybe she had heartburn, so they gave her a GI cocktail and sent us home. Thursday of that week and Friday, she laid on the couch in my office, and my staff and I monitored her, and she wasn't better. In fact, she was getting worse. Saturday morning, I hurried to Kaiser's emergency room again, and I said, it's not working. Something's really wrong here. They did a bunch of tests and said they're admitting her. They didn't tell me anything except she doesn't have a blood clot. And they said, we're going to give her a 1-to-1 in the hospital. I thought, well, hallelujah. Why haven't they ever done that before? And I stayed by her bedside, but I had hearings out in Solano County one day, and I said, I can't be here that day. And they said, don't worry, she has a 1-to-1. And I went, had my hearings. I got out after about 8 hours of hearings, and my phone was blowing up. And my adult children and my teenage children were saying, Mom, the police are investigating us. They say we've been poisoning Molly. I said, what? Poisoning? So I have to make this short because they only gave me a few minutes. But I stomped my feet. I got back to the hospital and found out that while I was gone, while she was alone, the staff social workers came in from Kaiser and questioned her. Adult Protective Services came in and questioned her, and Molly can't answer any WH questions. Okay, so when they said, does your mom give you medicine? She went, huh? Do you want to go home with your mom? She looked around, I wasn't there, so she went, huh? Ooh. Come to find out, to make this story shorter, they had found phenobarbital in her blood on Saturday. And they made the assumption immediately, that's not one of her medicines, so somebody's giving it to her. And because I did not have her conserved, several things happened. First thing, because she wasn't conserved, they did not have to tell me what was going on. So I was completely in the dark until that one day they knew I'd be out of the way. They didn't bother to tell me the one-to-one was not there watching Molly. She was watching me. And they didn't bother to tell me that she would be interviewed. And unfortunately, if she was conserved, she would not have been able to be interviewed alone. So, of course, I stamped my feet. I said, what's going on? I called in all of my attorney friends around the nation. I have a bunch in Texas, and I said, help, what do I do? Well, I got a hold of the legal department at Kaiser, and I said, the only place she's been is with you guys or on my couch. No one has given her that medicine. Well, Kaiser's GI cocktail has phenobarbital in it. However, I could not take her home because, you see, Adult Protective Services don't work as quick as Kaiser. So they still had to investigate my whole family, all my caregivers. And so I couldn't take her home. She had to go home with people she didn't know. So it took about 3 months, and they finally cleared me. Had she been conserved, that couldn't have happened. They would have had to tell me on Saturday what was going on. So that is why the power of medical decisions is so important. I'm going to go to the next slide, which is about some of my clients. And I'm going to kind of put them in a lump group because instead of telling you each of their stories because of time. Each of these young people came into my office. One is a boy who had severe autism. They're all adults over age 18. And 3 girls came in, all in 1 year. It was kind of the year for this. And all of them had been sexually assaulted. The girls had been they had been raped, and 2 of the girls had become pregnant, and one got a very serious STD in which she is still fighting horrible side effects from. The 2 girls that got pregnant both had Down syndrome, and one lost the baby, the other one the parent decided to abort. And in all 3 of the girls, the parents knew who the perpetrators were. Now, none of these girls knew each other. I work all over the state of California. It came from different parts of California. But the parents knew who the perpetrators were in all 3 cases with these girls. None of them could be arrested. Because, you see, when your child has Down syndrome or severe autism, they are not a very good witness. They can't get up on the witness stand and say, this was not consensual. There's an assumption after age 18 that sexual activity is consensual unless you say no. So the perpetrator was off scot-free in all 3 of those cases and obviously able to pick on someone else. The boy in this case, the parents hired a live-in care provider, a man. They walked in and found this molestation taking place and still could do nothing because he wasn't conserved. They had no rights. And though they said, this isn't supposed to be happening, the authorities said, well, we don't know. It could have been consensual. This might be what he wanted. So that perpetrator got off scot-free. So if you have the power of your child's sexuality, you decide who they can have those intimate relationships with. Limited conservatorship is what our regional center kiddos can get. And one of these days, I do travel around and I speak. If you ever come to one of my seminars, I tell you a lot more stories of my own with some of my other kids and conservatorship. But the bottom line is it is expensive, and that's why I didn't do it. I have attorneys that work for me that I require them to charge half of the going rate because it's so ridiculously expensive. The thing is, when there's 7 powers, and when you take these powers with a limited conservatorship, you can pick which powers work. Now, my girls don't have the power to vote, although I kind of thought about not taking that power away. I don't think that's really right, but anyway. So there's these powers, and it's limited. You pick the powers that you think your child needs you to be responsible for. Contract, if your child signs something someone gives them, especially if they're higher functioning, and they sign a contract, they're liable. And this happens all the time, and usually when we think of conservatorship, we think of the money issues. But today I brought up the issues that are a little more uncomfortable. The issues of their intimate relationships and medical. And so I hope that I have encouraged you. I know my stories are a little sad, but it's really important for us to know that when these people do these things, they need to be held accountable by our authorities, and our kids are very much at risk. They pick on these kinds of individuals because if they're not conserved, they're a good target. So anyway, that's what I encourage you today to consider whether or not you're going to conserve your child as an adult.
Okay, thanks. So we can take some questions. Are there any questions? Just yell it out.
Hi, I'm Mary. So what is the bad thing about conservatorship? I know all the good thing about it. Is there any bad?
There isn't. The regional center, you can stop the conservatorship anytime you want. It doesn't have to go on forever and ever. If your child gets better with therapy, you can stop it. The only thing that you will hear from the regional centers is they don't agree with this because the Lanterman Act encourages these our kids to be independent. The problem is this isn't something that's safe for them. And the regional centers are required by the court to provide a whole report on your child. Yes.
Sorry.
Hello.
Yep.
I just went through conservatorship of my 19-year-old.
Speak up, please.
My 19-year-old son was just recently conserved. I'm now his conservator. If you have issues with another parent or custody issues, make sure it's well documented. Continue to have your documentation because it'll finally come to light once they investigate. And I am sole conservator.
Okay, thank you. Next.
Hi, my name is Cheryl. I just wanted to say conservatorship is not expensive. Attorney fees are expensive. You can do it yourself. It's just paperwork. You fill it out. If you get it wrong, the clerks at the court will tell you how to do it right, and you just keep on trying until you get it right. There's no negative consequence. You can do it. I did it for both of my sons, and now they're conserved, and you can get the court fees waived. So I would, if it's the right option for your family, I would encourage you to do it, and you can get support.
Approximately how much would it be for someone to conserve a child?
Most of the families that work through our agency don't feel they have the emotional energy, but I applaud this mom because I do have families that have done that. The fees are usually about $6,000 at this point. My attorneys aren't allowed to charge more than $2,500 unless they're complicated.
Okay, great. We're going to take the last 2 questions and we're done. Go.
I currently have guardianship of my niece. Do I need to switch it over to conservator? She's 17. Do I have to switch it over to conservatorship?
When she's 18, your guardianship will have no value.
Okay. So
when they turn 18, it doesn't matter that they're disabled. They are now adults and you have no say.
Okay. Do you have a question? We have one question from a parent that needs to be translated. Go ahead.
I don't know if it's an appropriate question, but mom is concerned about what are the signs that a child shows when he's being sexually abused.
Wow. That's probably a whole other topic. I don't know. I think we need a professional and, Next year's conference. Okay. Sorry, guys. I will come here next time for the next questions, but we're good. They're all going to go in depth later. There's going to be breakout sessions for 45 minutes where you can talk to them also. Sorry. Okay. Thanks, Myra. Okay. Somebody from North Carolina came all the way from North Carolina to be here with us today. So, April Lee, please, welcome.
How are we doing this?
Is it set?
The
Right, wrong,
side
right.
button, right? Down.
There you go, yeah.
Hi, guys. My name is Leah Clinard. Thank you for having me in California, and it's really nice to hear all the resources you guys have. So I will be talking about job skills in kids with autism. I am a professional in the field, and I am an autism mom as well. At UNC Chapel Hill, we did a research study with 4 components in post-secondary outcomes, and we found that they were very grim. So one of our components was transitioning into adulthood and into the job field. So we have Harry. Harry is high functioning. He was in a class that was self-contained, but we did have him out in some of the classrooms as well, getting some general curriculum. And we found that he was very interested in computers. He was very good at coding. It was a rote skill for him. He is very perseverative, but he will talk about his preferred topics, which were computers as well. So he knew what to do when he got the job because he had taken so many. We made sure that he was going to the community college to take some computer classes so that he had these skills that are relevant to the work field. But we did create some visuals for him before the interview. We created social scripts, and I do have an example of his. So we had taught him throughout the years to do eye contact, but we were still a little concerned with touch. So we had the visuals, and he was literate, so he was able to read these. We'll shake hands, make the eye contact, and we'll wear a tie and slacks. He loved his sweats. So we had to make sure that he was appropriately dressed. And then we created a social script for Harry. So we practiced this daily. We had a video modeling session for him first to kind of show him how people would do interviews. So we just wanted him to start basic with how he would introduce himself. So this is just the example of it. So, hi, my name is Harry. Thank you for interviewing me. Just things that we would have that we would say as well. And then to go over his interests. My interests are in computers. I've learned how to key in data. In school, I use Google Docs, Sheets, and Slides. I've learned to create formulas. And then we had him talk about why he would be good at this job. He knows what to expect. It fits his interests, and he really liked doing it. He's knowledgeable, and he can enter data into the system to make their job easier. So when he went, they did talk about this with him, and he was able to communicate his skills, and then they did put him on a computer to make sure that he did what he could say he could do, and he could. He stayed in school till he was 22. And now he is actually taking advanced computer classes at one of our community colleges, Durham Tech, and he's doing coding for the Rape Crisis Center, North Carolina, in Chapel Hill. So we practiced these and we reviewed them data, and like I said, now he is coding data into the system for the Rape Crisis Center. So he's doing really good work and giving back. So we have Heather. Heather is also verbal. She has really good people skills. She loves food. She wanted to interact with people for most of the day. So unlike Harry loved those rote skills. He loved to just kind of be by himself and on his computer, but Heather was the social little butterfly. So we worked with VR, vocational rehab, which is it's very good in North Carolina. We have that benefit. And McDonald's, someone from the first panel talked about McDonald's. We work with them a lot. They are very good about giving our children jobs and training them and retaining them. So we worked with the ARC, which I did find out that you guys have that here as well, to set up her transportation. We have a lot of really good public transportation in Chapel Hill. So we programmed them into her phone, and she would call them to set up her transportation. So we used a task analysis. So daily, and she would refer to this probably 2 or 3 times a day. She would call Michelle, that was her CAP worker. And then we just kind of told her what to do. We didn't need a script with her. She knew what to say, just to let her know who it is. Say, hey, I'm Heather, and I'm working today at 2 o'clock. Can you pick me up at 1:30? And just to make sure that to call him when she was done. And then make sure to tell him the name of the supervisor of the name for that day. Afterwards, what we did was we wanted to get her towards more independent transportation because we do have a free bus system in Chapel Hill where I'm from. So she wanted to work independently to get to work, and the ARC presented her. So what they did was her CAP worker literally just for 2 or 3 weeks went the route with her and just practice. And they rode the bus with her, and they showed her where to. Luckily, it was a direct route. We didn't have to do any changes, but she has learned to go to the mall and stuff. It does have some bus changes. And then we used another task analysis for her and let her lead the route with us. So we practiced with her and led it, and then we let her kind of do it herself, but we were still there to make sure. So her task analysis, she would set her alarm each day, shower and brush her teeth. She's doing that independently now as well, so we don't really need that part of it anymore. Make sure to put your waffle in the toaster. So she would eat breakfast, walk up to the street. She was very close to the public bus stop to get on the J bus on the 3rd stop, and then have a great day working at McDonald's. And then after work outside, make sure you go, because the stop was right outside of McDonald's, and then on the stop, which is DeMarco Street, then get off the downtown and you're home. And now she can do this now without the task analysis. She's been working at McDonald's for about 3 or 4 years. So Cyrus was my nonverbal boy. He has autism, but also has strength and rote skills. And he worked with his team in order to use the task analysis and the visual schedules to perform these skills. He has a great smile. Everybody loves to see him smile. So vocational rehab and the IEP team, as well as the transition coordinator, they lined him up to get a job where he bags groceries so he could do those rote skills, but also practice interacting with people. And he used a task analysis for what is taped to the side of the register. And I had an example of what we did for him. And this literally took us, we just did it with Microsoft Word or Pages, something. And we typed it out. We found some visuals on Google and we just set them in. These interventions take you maybe 10 minutes. So we had the visual for, say hello and smile or wave hello and wave. And then if the item is cold, and we did have to work with him quite a bit on this. We worked with him for about 3 weeks. If it's cold, you put it in the blue bag. And then we had examples, the fruit, the milk, the frozen. The meat gets put in one bag together. We had the visuals there. Eggs go in a bag by themselves, had that visual. And anything that doesn't need to stay cold, we put it in a brown bag. So he was able to learn those different sorting techniques. And then smile again and wave goodbye. We are working now because North Carolina has gotten very green and eco-friendly, so people are bringing their own bags. So we're working with him now on the separating out for that too. So evidence-based practices, repetition, visuals, these are ways that young adults can succeed in the job field. We do have pretty good employment rates right now that we're working on in North Carolina. And I'll be doing another session later too, so if we need to talk about this.
Okay, so we can, any questions for April?
Yeah.
So I have a question about, did you form connections with the community to get these jobs? My son has been looking for a long time for a job, and the program that he's in is not into going out and building those connections in the community. Also, he has like an AA and early childhood education, so we're trying to get him a job in that. But he's been interviewing in the competitive job market for over a year.
Yeah.
And I think, I know, and I've gone to the Department of Rehab, and finally they've deemed him eligible to get support. But the point is that the program he's in isn't doing this, like linkages with the community, and how important do you think that is? And what's the role there?
So we start this in high school. We use a program called community-based learning and vocational rehab, and then we have transition coordinators in every school to start this when they're 14 to go ahead and put a portfolio together. And we have different agencies. We have transition fairs for parents as well, and we talk about guardianship or conservatorship, we call it something else. But we do a lot of those to go ahead and get them in when they transition into high school when they're 14, because that gives them about 8 years to get those companies in as well. But we work really hard with vocational rehab as well.
Okay, so vocational rehab builds those relationships with the community. So you don't have to explain to them, Yeah, okay, I get it.
And like I said, we have transition coordinators. I don't know if you guys have them in the high schools here, but they help with
Long story.
funding. Okay.
Last question, please.
I just want to make a point, and the point is, there are individuals like my son who are mostly nonverbal,
Right.
have significant cognitive challenges, that have great skills.
Yep.
But they're not going to work in an office.
No.
They're not going to bag groceries. They are not being served.
Agreed.
They simply are not being served.
Yep.
They may need, someone to tell them what to do, that kind of thing. And in California, at least in Northern California where we are, individuals like my child are not being served. And the State Department of Rehab will not provide services to my child. And there's probably more individuals in this category than people realize. And it's really a big, big, big issue. And these people need to be served.
It's a
Especially
crisis.
when I know, there are lots of things my child can do that are not janitorial work.
I agree.
Which seems to be the standard. So I just want to make that point, and it's a big issue.
Yeah, it's a crisis. I mean, that's what I would call it.
I have a question. Has there ever been a client that had, for example, some issues that you couldn't serve, like if the client had behavioral challenges, is that an exclusionary criteria for being able to find a job?
We did. I mean, we've had kids who have behaviors that it was hard to do. We've had CAP workers that have had to go to work with our students and work kind of one-on-one with them, that they had to use those practices, and I mean, we've had to have them removed, and it's been hard to place those kids. If kids with physical disabilities, it's been hard to place them as well. So I did get my letter or my sign. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, next up is Joanna. And Joanna's going to talk about self-determination, the pros and the cons. We're still in the pilot phase, so maybe in a few years we'll talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly.
This is the clicker?
This is the clicker.
Just okay. All right, I'm Joanna Jaeger, and I was anybody have a child who has been selected in this lottery for self-determination? Okay, 10 maybe. This is a rollout. It's not really a pilot because they've been piloting it over the last 15 years, but it's another rollout of 1% of all the regional center clients. And we were selected, and we got our budget and started doing it on September 1st. So we've been actually getting paid and all that. So how I got here was 5 years ago. I went to a self-determination conference in LA and said, we need to do that. My son was turning 22, aging out of the school system. There was nothing that really appealed to me. I started my wheels turning at that point to say, I'm really interested in doing this. So we started learning and investigating at that time. He aged out of school, and we created sort of our own program. So we've been essentially doing self-determination, but within the construct of the regional center system since 2015. We've had a lot of frustration with staffing and agencies, which sort of nudged us in that direction as well. And then we got on the list to be selected, and we were selected in the lottery. We officially started the process in May of 2019, having meetings with regional center staff and developing a budget and that sort, and we started our program on September 1st. The premise is, and I think it's an economic premise as much as anything, is that it's not going to cost the state any more money to do this than it would to deliver traditional regional center services. So that's the hope. I mean, from my perspective, it's the flexibility and the opportunity to be creative that is more motivating. But the reason it was I think was ultimately approved is that the premise is that it's not going to cost the state any more money. Question is it right for you? Right now, if you have a school-age child, you probably don't have much of a budget to work with. So that's going to be, so if you have a child who's aged out of the school system, an adult, then it starts to be a reasonable amount of budget to utilize. Are you happy with your current programs and services? Do you have, is your child being served consistently and regularly? Are the staffing issues not getting in the way? Do you have the time and resources to manage a program like this? I'm finding it's a lot of work, and I have the luxury of being a stay-at-home mom, and I'm very well connected in the community, and know people to ask, and have found people to work in the program. But it's no minor undertaking. It takes a lot of effort and coordination. And are you currently accessing programs and services that are going to allow you to have a robust budget? So if your kid is in a day program 30 hours a week or whatever, they're doing transportation, you're getting respite, that gives you a bucket of potential budget that you can work for. The pros, it's person-centered. That's the core of all of this, is the person-centered plan, focusing on what your individual child and your family needs and deems appropriate for a good quality of life. Control, I know we as parents of kids with special needs, one of our unique pathologies is we tend to be control freaks. And it's partly because we've been dealt a whole bunch of stuff that we haven't had control over, so we want to control everything else. So this gives you an opportunity to do that. Flexible, I'm paying people more. I went from people who were being paid about $16, $17 an hour through an agency. Now I'm paying them all $25 an hour, which is enough to keep somebody around. I have a 19-year-old who's working with my son. She's making $25 an hour. She has died and gone to heaven. She's like, I'm going to say, and she works with us for about 15 hours a week. So she's making more money than she would if she were working full-time in a minimum wage job. The ability to provide non-traditional services. We were able to get a gym membership approved and a personal trainer, and if we wanted to send him to cooking classes or other kinds of activities, those are easier to access. And then accessing the natural supports in your community. So we have focused our program on Alex's connection to our community. He volunteers at the library and the senior center and the sports center and the community center, and people know him around town. I mean, I walk around town with him and they're like, hey, Alex, and I have no idea who these people are. It's awesome. And it's all within about 2.5 miles of our house. So we live in Milpitas, and we've been able to cultivate that real community. We were at the vet's office day before yesterday, and the guy says, I know him. And I'm like, I don't know, where do you know him from? And he said, Orchard Supply Hardware. It's like, he used to shop in the garden center where Alex used to work. So the cons, this takes a lot of planning. You got to do a person-centered plan, which is no minor undertaking. Trudy Grable does an amazing training and is actually certifying some people in person-centered planning, I believe. You're developing a good IPP, developing a robust budget, negotiating with that. When we established our budget, it's supposed to be based on the expenditures that the regional center had in the previous year. Well, we had a bunch of undelivered services, so the $30,000 that the regional center had spent didn't reflect what they should have been spending. And so we ended up with a budget of about $47,000. Okay, it was better than, it wasn't quite what I asked for, because when I asked for it, I said, I'm going to put in everything that I do, all the transportation, all the job development, all the coaching, all of the things, and we've met somewhere in the middle on that. So you need to identify and hire your own staff. If you have a great community of people that might not fit traditional, might not be able to be or interested in being employed by an agency, you can employ your neighbor to spend time with your kid in the afternoon. That's a cool thing. You can employ relatives. I was even able to get approval to have myself paid, which was not, they weren't expecting to do that, but I kind of said, well, this is what I do. I do job development. It's a real thing in the regional center system. You pay people to do this. I'm doing it. I know the community. I know the resources. I should be paid to do it. So I'm doing that. You're the program manager, the personnel manager, the chief cook and bottle washer, everything. And again, if you don't have a robust budget to work with, it's a little bit limited. So, for instance, if you have a school-age child and you're only accessing respite services, well, the respite rate is $17 an hour. There's nothing else to kind of pull and juggle from. So what we were doing was taking the billable rate that the regional center was paying for some of these agencies was $41 an hour. They were paying the people, the direct staff, $16, $17 an hour. So I was able to take that 41 and both increase the number of hours and increase the rate of pay so that it makes people more likely to stay and you know, more willing to participate, and we got more hours out of it as well. So the process, you know, in over 5 years, develop a person-centered plan which focuses on what the needs and wants and the preferences are. It's about what's important to your child and what's important for your child. And it doesn't mean, and this is when a lot of parents really struggle with this, it doesn't mean that if your kid says, I want to sit in the basement and watch videos all day, that that's what they get to do. You know, you're an adult. You have to go out and you have to participate in activities. You have to have things to do, contributions to make, meaningful work, lots of different things. And it's not that we just say, oh, we're going to just let them do whatever they want. We wouldn't do that with our typical child. We wouldn't do that. You know, it's like, sorry, the choice is not that. It's not go to Disneyland every day, but it could be go to Disneyland once a year, and that could be part of your budget. You can do that. You can pay for transportation. My son is learning to use Uber because he falls asleep on the bus. So we're paying for Uber, and we're paying for teaching him how to do that. And so all of these steps, the biggest and most challenging one is sort of developing the budget and figuring out how you're going to go about managing the program. This is Alex. He's 27 years old. He was diagnosed with autism at 2, type 1 diabetes at 7. He needs support. We've developed a little business called Big Al's Best, and he makes candy and cards and that he sells in shops all over the site. So we've got a interesting and robust program that keeps him busy, and he volunteers 5 days a week in our community, and he loves his desire, his stated desire when he was getting out of school. I asked him, Alex, what do you want to do when you grow up? And he said, I want to be a helper. And I can't think of a better way to organize his life. If he can be helpful in any way, he's happy to do that, and he takes real pride in that.
Great. Thank you so much, Joanna. We're going to take questions. Okay. I actually have a question that I've heard a lot. What happens? You get a budget, say it's $30,000, and as life, you know, shit happens sometimes, and you need more money. What can you do about that?
There's two categories of ways to access more money in the budget. It's an unmet need, which in our case it was undelivered services, and a change in circumstance, a life change that says, you know, a parent's circumstances change or the individual circumstances have changed. And you can make the case that, you know, my son has now decided he wants to go to, cooking school, or he wants to learn to be a musician or whatever, that you could add those kinds of things. And it's based on that dynamic person-centered plan.
Go ahead.
Hi, Julie. I have a question. Some of the services my son is receiving, they tend to want to push him into the vocational field. And he has expressed interest in going to college and staying in college. With this particular program, can you pay for support services for things that he might need in college?
I think absolutely.
Like tutoring and executive functioning.
I think absolutely. If you can make the case for that. It's not, nothing's a guarantee, but also nothing is sort of, there's a limited number of budget categories, but how do you fit the services and supports that your child needs into those categories is like, that's going to be, if somebody figures out how to do that, it's like, that's going to be a really key to helping people navigate. But it could be, transportation based. It could be, personal development based. It can be, maybe somebody wants to start a small business, like we have any number.
Okay.
I have a question. How do you get on the list?
Well,
how do you get the training? Because there's no upcoming training.
There's the list for this round is sort of closed. self-determination will be open in 2023 to everybody who chooses to. It's not going to be right for everybody, but it's going to be a possibility. So in the next in the next year or so, if you're not already on the list, then you should be preparing. Start to do person-centered plan. Start to investigate. Start to beef up your IPP and things like that.
Sorry, we don't have any more time for questions for Joanna, so we have to move on to our next session. She'll be presenting again. Everyone's going to have another breakout session that you can go to, and they'll be able to talk more in depth, 45 minutes. Our next presenter is Brad Boardman. He's the executive director about the Morgan Center, and he's going to talk about something that's really important and something that's honestly been very scary for me and a lot of parents, especially given the recent killing of a young man with autism, developmental disabilities at the Costco. So we want to talk about first responder training and supports in the community. Please, welcome.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone. Let me see if I can get to our first slide. My name is Brad Boardman. I'm the executive director at Morgan Center. I just wanted to tell you briefly about our program. We have a school program and adult day program. We serve 120 individuals every day on our campus. Part of our outreach that we do is to train first responders on autism, and over the past 10 years, we've trained about 600 officers and law enforcement personnel per year, so about 6,000 over the past 10 years. So part of the training that I do with officers is to have a conversation like this where I'm introducing them to autism and teaching them about some of the challenges people with autism have. But the second part of that training is to invite the officers to our campus, and quite often throughout the year we'll have days where we have 100 officers on our campus where they can have a chance to work or interact with our students and our adult clients and just learn more about interacting successfully with folks with autism. So I have a couple of tips that I'm going to talk about this morning to help you have successful interactions with police officers, you and your child or your adult. First, something you can do, if you make the call to police, etc., you can always ask for a CIT trained officer. CIT means crisis intervention training, and these are officers and law enforcement personnel, first responders, paramedics, firefighters, etc., including dispatch, who have some training on autism. In San Jose, CIT is a really big thing, but we've done trainings all over the Bay Area, so these officers are available throughout the Bay Area. So if you make a call, absolutely ask for a CIT trained officer. Second tip is to educate. So it's really important that you have a close relationship with your neighbors. I do realize that it might not be ponies and rainbows with all of your neighbors. However, it is really important to forge relationships with your neighbors because they are a part of that catch net that is going to be there to support you when things happen. So make sure that your neighbors know your child or adult well. Make sure they understand the kinds of emergencies that your child or adult might experience. They can be really helpful to you in a crisis. They can be talking with police officers if you're not available, etc. Make sure you talk to them about the kinds of experiences or emergencies you might have, such as elopement or wandering, tantrum behavior, yelling, screaming, stripping, self-injurious behavior, etc. And of course, any medical issues that your child or adult might have. If you are experiencing an emergency in public, if you're, for instance, in a crowded grocery or something like that, look to a friendly bystander for help if needed. My experience is there's always someone close by who will be understanding and can be helpful to you. Communicate with others the need for space and time. One of the things that I try to really drum into the first responders when I do the training is that space and time are your friends. So definitely communicate that with others around you. Ask for help to create a safe space for your child or adult to de-escalate. That's a strategy that we employ at Morgan Autism Center quite often. And then model calm, supportive behavior so that bystanders are going to feed off of whatever level of emotion you're exhibiting at that time. So it's really important that you stay calm and you're modeling calm behavior so that they will be calm as well. They'll take their cues from you. Again, if you make the call, try to give information to dispatch, as much information as you possibly can before officers, paramedics, etc. arrive on the scene. So take the time to describe the nature of the emergency, the kinds of things that you're observing. Super important to give them information about what kind of response you believe will be helpful. Quite often, police officers don't know what they're being asked to do when they come to a call. So be very explicit with them. Make sure that they understand that you may not want them to go hands-on with your child. In fact, probably a good idea not to go hands-on. And make sure they understand if maybe a child is holding a comfort item or something that might be mistaken for a weapon. And of course, describe health issues again. Tip 5 is to be able to describe your child accurately. A really big thing that I think law enforcement people struggle with is when an individual is nonverbal, they still may be looking for signs that the individual is listening and paying attention. So giving them information about, does your child or adult respond to their own name? Will they turn toward you, etc. That can be really helpful because an officer, if a child or adult is ignoring them completely and turned away from them or walking away from them, they may get the wrong idea about it. So be really, really explicit about that. Is your child verbal, nonverbal? What kind of behavioral challenges does your child or adult experience? Any sensory issues? And of course, you want to coach them on how to interact successfully with your child or adult. Tip 6 is to make sure that you, your caregivers, your neighbors, etc., have good photos and video available so that you can show that information to officers. My experience in working with our school-age students is that when we get a referral in, I love to ask for a video because a video can give me a ton of information about functioning, interaction style, those kinds of things. So we all have smartphones. Use that smartphone, have some really good photos on that smartphone. Encourage your neighbors to have some photos of your child so they can be helpful to you in a crisis. Identification is tip 7. Try to ensure that your child or adult can easily be identified. You may not always be there, of course, and we want them to be identified so that they can come back to you soon. Train your child or adult to carry identification. Encourage them to wear medical alert bracelets or necklaces. Of course, many individuals have sensory issues and will not wear those things, but a lot of parents are now using shoelace identification tags. So find one of those and lace it into their shoes. The sensory issues will be a non-issue. Make sure that there are labels in their clothing. If your child or adult is someone who uses an AAC device for communication, make sure that you're training your child on how to give their personal information so that they can do it if they're lost or wandering or something like that. Tip 8 is to meet with law enforcement. Go to coffee with a cop. San Jose Police Department has these events on their website. You can just go to their website, find out about it. I think they'd get more takers if it was coffee and a donut with a cop, but definitely go to those events. It's a chance to introduce yourself and your child or adult to law enforcement officers in a situation that is not stressful and start to forge relationships. Seek another way to introduce your child or adult to officers before an emergency. You can take them for a visit to the fire station. First responders are not always police officers. Quite often they're fire personnel, etc. So take chances or make some chances to go out and visit with those folks. And last, I know that several parents, one in front of me right here, have written letters to their local police departments to introduce themselves and their child or adult. Super important. My parting tip is that you are all experts on behavior of your students or your children, your adults, etc. If you are living in a place far away like North Carolina and you think the law enforcement and first responders need some training, offer your services because you can tell them quite a bit about how to be successful. Thank you all. Happy to take questions.
We only have time for one question, so one question, yell it out.
Hi, you didn't cover this, but I read, or I heard on a webinar once that if a person with disability, say autism or whatever, was not by a police officer, and they are read their Miranda rights, to teach them to say, when they're asked, do you understand these rights, to teach them to say, no, I do not understand my rights.
Repeat the question, yes?
Okay. So the question was about Miranda rights, right? So if a police officer is questioning an individual with autism, the advice was to train the individual with autism to reply that they really do not understand their Miranda rights. So thank you, that's a great tip. Later today I'll be talking about the other side of things. So I'll give an overview of the training that I give to officers. I hope it'll be a nice chance to have a discourse about maybe some of the ideas that you have. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Brad. Finally, we're going to welcome Dr. Janet Miller. She's newly at Stanford, but was previously at UCSF, and she's going to talk about diagnosing adults on the spectrum.
Thank you. Okay, great. So I'm going to be talking about diagnosing adults who really are coming in for the first time for a diagnosis. And there really has been a trend in seeing more adults in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and even 50s for a first-time diagnosis. And because they're coming in at that point in life, often they tend to be verbal, higher functioning, so to speak, average or above average intelligence. But of course, we also do see individuals who may have been misdiagnosed with, say, they have severe intellectual disability or were diagnosed with a psychotic disorder, when in truth, they either had autism in addition or instead of. But I'm going to be focusing more on the verbal individuals who come in for the first time. There are a number of reasons why people might be missed in childhood. You might have the child who is, functioning okay in school, doesn't really have behavioral problems, and maybe is that nerdy kid who just doesn't have a lot of friends, and it didn't occur to anybody that maybe he might have autism, especially, a few decades ago. There was less awareness. And then there are those kids who may have a lot of behavior problems and are seen by a professional, but they're misdiagnosed. They may be given conduct disorder or oppositional defiant disorder when really it's autism. Often they're given an ADHD diagnosis, which may be accurate, but they also meet criteria for autism, and that was missed. There also sometimes is unconscious or conscious bias in who we test. Non-white children are often seen and diagnosed later, and that's still the case. But hopefully, as more awareness about autism and diagnosis comes online, we're going to see less of that. Girls also tend to be missed more often, and I could give a whole talk on that, but just wanted to note it. So why now? So why, if someone has made it into their 30s or 40s without a diagnosis, are they coming in, and why is it necessary? Sometimes there are practical reasons. So they may need services or either from the government or maybe some accommodations that they would need a diagnosis in order to get. But I think even more importantly, for a lot of the individuals who don't really need those kinds of services, they do need therapy and they need the appropriate treatment. And without a diagnosis of autism, they may be seeing a therapist who really doesn't understand the condition. And I've met a number of adults on the spectrum who really got a very, had a bad experience in therapy and really were not helped or even made worse because of that. On a more personal level, there are reasons that an adult might benefit from a diagnosis of autism. And I noticed that there is often a sense of relief and sort of a new perspective on their life when they realize that they have autism. Suddenly it makes sense why they had, problems with kids or fitting in or were teased or bullied or just didn't really understand the jokes that other kids seem to be getting. It also helps them to really see their strengths in a new way and also look at some of the challenges differently, not so self-blaming and thinking, they've been told often for many years, oh, you're just not trying hard enough, or you're stubborn, or, being labeled, when in reality, there's another reason for them having a hard time doing some of the things they're being asked to do. It can also help them to feel more a sense of belonging to a group or an identity that can be empowering, and find other people who are also on the spectrum with similar interests and people they feel they can relate to better and fit in. I think what also tends to happen is that when people around them learn of the diagnosis, relationships, interpersonal relationships can shift. I've certainly seen this with couples where one is on the spectrum and gets diagnosed after they've been married for years, and the neurotypical spouse just can't figure out why their partner is so difficult or so obstinate, as they're saying. And when they learn more about autism and why these things are happening, they're more able to really support their spouse, and I've seen marriages really turn around when that happens. So in diagnosing autism in adults, you're using the same criteria that you would be for children, and it's in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And here you have two core domains. One is social communication, and the other is restricted and repetitive behaviors and interests. I'm not going to go into any of the details on that, but you're going to use these whether you're diagnosing a child or an adult at various levels. You also need to identify whether or not there was language delay and or intellectual disability. But in addition to those core symptoms, there are a lot of other conditions and symptoms and characteristics that frequently come along with having autism. In the mental health area, we see a lot of inattention and hyperactivity, anxiety, depression, sometimes obsessions and compulsions, sleep and eating problems, as well as emotional dysregulation and other issues that are up here. So it's very important to be assessing for all of these things, including executive functioning, daily living skills, and things like that. In addition, you must show some impairment in early development. So when you see an adult in their 30s or 40s, you need to figure out a way to find out what was going on in early development. And sometimes that can be challenging. But without that, you really can't give a diagnosis of autism. And then you also have to show current significant impairment in major areas of functioning. So I think it's pretty, as I'm sure all of you know, it's a very heterogeneous diagnosis, and the presentations can vary widely, as well as the causes and the treatments that are appropriate. The basic elements of a diagnostic assessment also are pretty similar across the lifespan, and you always need to do some sort of a parent or caregiver interview, mainly to see what was going on in early development, get a really good developmental history, and then you always do an assessment with the adult themselves, and that can consist of an ADOS. Now most people are doing the ADOS for all ages. That stands for Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule. And in this group, usually we do a module 4. Always do some cognitive testing to look at ways of thinking and problem solving, and get a baseline IQ. And self-report questionnaires with verbal and literate individuals are very helpful, and especially in looking at some of those co-occurring mental health conditions. If you suspect any medical issues, seizures are more common. There's sometimes genetic abnormalities that need to be looked into. You would definitely want to have those checked out. So the prevalence of co-occurring mental health conditions in autism is unfortunately a lot higher in people with autism, not just adults, but children as well, than in the general population. And it does not bode well when you have, the more you have, the worse you seem to do, and some of the autism symptoms can be worse because of it. The most commonly seen ones in adults tend to be anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, and ADHD, and which ones you might have depends sometimes on whether or not you have an intellectual disability or not. But those are the most common, but unfortunately there are still others that happen with greater frequency as well, including schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and there does tend to be higher incidence of suicide attempts. So that's something you really need to watch out for as well. Okay, 1 minute, thank you. So diagnosis in adults can be challenging in different ways with children. Some of the issues have to do with the subtlety in some of the symptoms and the co-occurring conditions. It can be hard to make that differential diagnosis because a lot of the symptoms do overlap, and they can sometimes mimic symptoms on the spectrum. And of course, sometimes it would be appropriate to give both an autism diagnosis as well as a diagnosis of depression or ADHD or whatever. The developmental history piece is a real challenge if you're testing an older adult. If there are no parents available, or their memories are no longer great, or even if they have good memories, it's pretty hard to remember what happened 30 years ago. Nowadays, people tend to take a lot of videos, but that's not always the case in some of the adults that we're still seeing. The barriers to access can be significant in that really there are not that many therapists or clinicians who diagnose adults in autism, not a lot of clinics who provide that. They might take insurance, they might not, but there's a lot of financial barriers as well. And to some degree, the assessment tools and the diagnostic criteria aren't always as appropriate as they could be for adults. So I think that's my time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Miller. Okay, we can have one question from the audience. Over there.
We have one question? Yeah. Okay, and I have a question regarding DSM-5 and whether or not you think DSM-6 will be a little bit more clear, because if we go through diagnostic criterion of stereotype or repetitive behaviors, lack of social, emotional reciprocity, I think all of us have autism. Right? But it's really different than our kids' autism. So, and in fact, like a self-advocacy network says you can self-diagnose if you want to. So what's your feelings about that?
Wow. I mean,
in a nutshell.
In a nutshell, it's a huge problem. And Jill knows I took out some slides that, I wanted to go into that piece a lot more, not so much on what's coming up in the 6, but just the huge problem that we have in diagnosing with this big umbrella category that sort of, so much can fit in there. And really what we're seeing is a lot of different things that are being called the same thing, and that just doesn't seem to be the case. So it's a huge problem, and I know the field is trying to sort that all out, but I don't know what's coming. Hopefully some good changes will be here for the next round.
Thank you so much.